How's
Hey,
it
Pia.
going? Oh wait, I gotta wait
No,
till the countdown. I keep
yeah,
forgetting, sorry. Hey there, Gil. How you doing?
I'm doing good. What about you?
Good. So I see some palm trees in the background. Where does this podcast find you?
We are podcasting from Costa Rica today, Santa
Oh,
Teresa to
wow.
be specific. It's in the jungle in the Nicoya Peninsula, and it's hot, and it's pretty awesome down here.
Yeah. So what brings you to Costa Rica?
Surf and work. So I'm here to surf because there's a great wave outside here on the beach, and yeah, there's it's one of the most wave-rich countries in the world. The waves here are consistent. They get waves about 320 days out of 365 days a year, so there's always something to surf. And of course, it's beautiful and got beautiful beaches here, and so yeah,
That's awesome. I'll be right over.
yeah, come by. There's
What?
plenty of room.
So you're the ultimate creative. This has to be a great place to work and kind of reconnect with your creative being. Many people who are listening probably don't know that you and I have worked together on branding projects for our clients at Fingerprint Marketing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but first, I want to get to what everyone asks when we start working with them on branding is like, I just need a logo, right?
Hmm.
And I explained to them that that's maybe 10% of the work that we do with them. The heavy lifting comes with the brand messaging, the unique proposition, the taglines, all that good stuff. Can you kind of tell me your approach to this and why it's so important to have that different mindset when you're owning a small business?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, it's about story, right? So everybody comes into
Hmm.
branding thinking, traditional branding. We want to do a logo. We want to do some colors, typography. But today, and in the past, that really was branding because that's where people communicated. They communicated in magazines, they communicated in billboards, and then they communicated in TV. So branding was very simple. You only saw brands in certain places. But now with social media, there's such a bigger dynamic to how people experience your business that it's not just about, graphics, because graphics change from platform to platform. It's really about the story that you're telling as a company. How do people think about you? They say branding is what people say behind your back, right? It's the
Hmm.
impression that your business has left on people. That's really what building a brand is. And so today it's not as much about the logo or the colors or typography. I mean, that's a very small part of the branding. It's really about the story you're telling.
And stories create emotions, and emotions create connections and create trust and all sorts of stuff. So that's what I
Human beings,
love about.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Human beings are storytelling machines. Everything that we do is in story. Like everything that we go to the store and something happens and we tell a story about it. We engage each other with stories. And so the story structure is something that's really ingrained in us. So we want to know story, right? And so if you frame something in a story structure, people engage more, they listen more, they get excited, and they have something that they can take with them because we remember stories. We don't remember lists of facts, but when somebody tells us a story of A to Z, then we remember that story because it creates emotional resonance.
Absolutely. But you know what? Telling a good story that's compelling is not easy. And that's why when you work with our clients, you do such a great job of pulling that story out. They might have a certain story that they want to tell, but that's not where the connection is happening. Can you talk about maybe one of our clients that we've worked with that they were struggling with their story and you helped them work on bringing that to fruition?
Well, first, let me say that the key to everything that I do is about looking at an entrepreneur's business from the outside in. So most entrepreneurs, they look at their business from the inside out. And so the first thing they think about when they're telling their story is what they do, right? So it's
Mm,
like, this is what I do, these are the details. So there's a, great metaphor for this. Customers aren't looking for a drill when they buy a drill. They want a hole, right? They don't care about the drill per se, how the drill is built. What they really want is a hole in their wall. And if the drill is
right.
going to make the hole, that's actually what they're buying. So the idea of storytelling is expanding on that and going, okay, look, you don't want a drill, you want a hole. So we're going to talk to you about this hole that we're going to create for you. And we're going to go beyond that. What does the hole mean? Well, the hole, it means that you can now build your house. And your house means that now your family has a place to live. And then it also means that you'll leave a legacy. Maybe you'll leave this house for your kids. And when you create that picture and then tell them, and that's why this drill is so important for you, now you've crafted a story. So that's what we do is we start from that whole perspective. What's the whole that a customer is trying to create? And then we talk about how our product or service creates that for them.
Do you have an example of someone who's doing it really well right now that you've seen, especially during COVID?
Well, I do. I have a few examples, but they're really from major brands. So I don't know if they'll
Yeah,
apply as much to small entrepreneurs, but I'll throw one out there. And this
yeah,
is an example that I think we talked about, or I presented in a webinar that we did, was with Marriott, right? And
yeah,
Marriott
right.
Hotels. And I don't know if you remember this example, but it was an amazing thing that Marriott did. Basically, when COVID first started, everybody was, there was that whole thing about we're all in it together and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, right? And so you had some companies trying to, capitalize and save their bottom line. So I was getting emails from Nordstrom telling me how, because we're all in it together, go to Nordstrom and you get 10% off, online sales or whatever. But then I got this other email from Marriott, which said, hey, we're all in it together. And here is what Marriott's doing. And we're providing this percentage of rooms to frontline workers. And we're closing up all our hotels in order to do this. And this is how we're participating. And, we're providing things. We're adding value. We're, actually participating in using our resources to help the pandemic and not just trying to give you discounts on hotel rooms, because one is very self-serving. So the story that Nordstrom is telling is very self-serving. The story that Marriott is telling is that, yeah, we're in this together. We want to make something work. So that's how a company like Marriott, for example, uses storytelling in order to, win loyalty from its audience. And I sure as hell, like when I saw that email, I was really moved. And
Mm,
there's even a video that was posted by the Marriott CEO that
I saw
really
that
was
actually.
really emotional, and he
And he
was,
teared up a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah,
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 yeah, and it was
and
authentic. So
yes.
what I'm
So in a lot of,
hearing,
yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say the authenticity bit is really important, right? Because
Yeah.
we all, all the, I think entrepreneurs think that when they start a business, they have to like turn into some kind of business person that now speaks some kind of professional language, and exactly the opposite is true. The more real you are, the more authentic you are, the more you show who you are and your emotions, the stronger of a connection you make with your customers and your audience.
That's great. One word that comes to mind is vulnerability. So I've had this conversation with some customer clients of ours, where how much vulnerability do you want to show without being unprofessional, but that creates a connection and emotion with your audience. So can you speak to that and kind of, because we all know that being vulnerable, people can immediately connect to you that way. But yet you want to remain professional, right?
Yeah. So, you know, vulnerability is not necessarily my specialty because it's really up to you on it's a very personal thing, right? You know, I
Yeah.
think some people can get more vulnerable than others. I think vulnerability, it actually goes into psychological territory, which is like really how strong do you feel at your core? And I think for entrepreneurs,
Mm,
that's really important because there's so much rejection in entrepreneurship. There's so
yeah.
much, especially when you're building a business for the first time. Every entrepreneur and business owner had that, you know, the first few years that they were struggling and that they were trying to talk about their business and it wasn't coming out right and people didn't really respond or didn't engage. Everybody has, you know, some kind of story like that. And and sorry, where was I going with that?
We kind of got off
Well,
track here. We're talking
yeah,
about
we're
vulnerability. So,
talking about,
so
yeah.
yeah.
Well, what I was going to say was basically, you know, you have to have a kind of a deep strength in your core and an acknowledgement that you're not perfect. You're not some professional machine that spits out professional dialogue and like professional, like perfect sales lines, right? You just have to be human and be honest and authentic and true to where your business is at any given moment and just be honest with that. And I think that is a vulnerability that most people have a hard time with. But the more they practice it, the stronger their communication will be. Because really, branding is about communication. That's what we're talking about here.
What are some of the misconceptions that small business owners have about branding? Besides the logo, I just need a logo.
Um, I think it's the one of the main misconceptions maybe is that that you do it once and it's a set it and forget it kind of thing. And truthfully, brands need to evolve. Working on your brand, everything you do that interacts with customers, even employees, sends a brand message, a story. If your employees aren't happy, if your customers aren't getting service, then that's a branding situation, right? That needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Mm-hmm.
story that people are taking away from doing business with you. So you always have to be thinking about what your brand represents and then
Mm-hmm.
create that in the real world. If your brand represents customer service, you have to create great customer service. If your brand represents convenience or trust, then you have to be trustworthy. You have to make things convenient, right? You have to create these brand ideologies and say, look, this is what we're about, and then stick to them and create an experience around them.
Well, my experience working with you, because we just rebranded, we're not quite finished yet, but we just rebranded after 14 years. And it was way overdue. It's always the shoemaker's kids that get the shoes last, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things is I recognize that consumers were different than they were obviously 15 years ago when we started the business. They're super smart. Not that they were stupid 15 years ago, but there's just so much more information, right? And
Yeah.
they're very overwhelmed and they're being blasted. So based on that, and we're in a very competitive market here in Seattle, digital agencies. So we really had to think differently. So I think to your point of constantly evolving the messaging, you have to keep up with who you're talking to, right?
Yeah.
And what you're laying down. The other thing that you mentioned, brand leads to story. So, it's easy, not easy, but, people come up with these cutesy taglines, right? Kind of your unique selling proposition, but then they don't support it with the right messaging on their website or in their marketing materials, which I know is a problem that you solve with people. Do you recommend starting with the story, and then from that story you go, oh, okay, this is what you do in a short and sweet manner?
Yeah, I think it's look, it needs to be a creative process. The best place to start is the story, but sometimes you have to find the story with what you have as well, right? So if you just create a story and don't think about the different parts of your business that already exist, you can set up a story that doesn't make sense. So it's really important to be looking at both. You have to look at the market and what the market wants to hear. You have to, you know, you have to look deep inside and see, like, what is it that I want as an entrepreneur? Like, what do I want my personal story to be in this whole thing? And I think that's something that we talked to you about, right? Like when we talked about
Mm-hmm.
Fingerprint marketing, one of the questions was, where does Pia fit into the business, right? Like, what's Pia's
Mm-hmm.
role? Are you a figurehead that where the business actually relies on your personality and your character? Are you kind of out? Is the business its own brand? Those two things tell very different stories. If we go on your site and we see Pia up front, then we know that Pia is a figurehead, and so we take your personality and infuse that in the business. But we could go another direction. We can say, look, the business has its own personality and tells its own story, and Pia happens to be the founder. Those are two very different experiences that people get, and they lead to different experiences for your customers. If you're on the front of the page and people are buying you, in essence, then they want to talk to you. And so you need to give time. So there's certain things that need to happen in your business as a result of, the story that you want to tell and how you as an entrepreneur want to be a part of your business.
Yeah, that was the biggest aha moment working with you on our brand was, I just shared that trust is the biggest asset that we have in our business. And many of our clients always come to me and they're like, well, what would Pia do? Right. So,
Mm-hmm.
so they just kind of have that trust, that level of trust that I will come up with a solution no matter what. So we took that and ran. Whereas before I was the figurehead, I had the team, I still have a team, but it's more about you're the chief imagination officer, you're the experience guide.
Mm-hmm.
So that was super helpful. I know a lot of listeners out there are torn between, how do I make that decision? Am I the figurehead? What happens if I want to step out of the business? What happens if I don't want to be the figure, up front? But people know me that way.
Yeah.
I think people, small businesses especially, struggle with that
Yeah.
as they want to scale. But how do they scale if they're the brand?
And that's an important, I think that's an important distinction. And that's something that you have to make a decision about. And the best way to do that is to explore what those stories all look like. So in the
Mm,
creative process, we ask those questions. You don't just make a decision, right? We say, well, what would it look like if you were the figurehead? And down the line, what would that mean? It means that your image would be on the front. It means that that maybe customers want to actually meet you in a certain way. It means that if you want to sell the business, somehow your image has to be transferred, right? There's all of these things that if you brand it this way are going to come down the line. On the other hand, if Pia's not part of it or the entrepreneur is not part of the business, now you're trying to create a personality around the business. It creates a whole other set of challenges. When a person is the figurehead, you get that person's personality and energy in the business. If the person is not the figurehead, now you have to create personality for a business that doesn't even exist. So it's a little more difficult, but it creates, a different user experience. Now, if people love the business, then they think about the business. They do think about the people if you're in the service industry, but they still
right.
see the business as its own entity. And then maybe when you sell, you don't have to worry about a person stepping out. So those are kind of two different sort of, and you have to just look in the future. And that's a part of our process, is looking into the future and kind of going, if this is the story we tell, what will happen? And if this is the story we tell, what's going to happen? And which one aligns to the best of your knowledge right now? Which one aligns with where you want to go? And then you make that decision. And then a year or two down the line, you may have to revisit it. And that's okay, because that's a part of what you do. You can always step back into the business. You can always step out of the business. There's always a way to retell the story. And I think that's the beautiful thing about story, is multiple stories fit, the same event. I mean, look at our
Mm,
legal system, right? It's like you have
mm-hmm.
prosecution and defense, and there's one event, and everybody's got a different story. There's an old saying, I wish I had this because it's brilliant, but I don't have it. So cut this out of the interview. But there's this old
We'll
saying
have it in
about
the show
story.
notes.
there's always two sides to a story. Do you know this saying?
Hmm.
There's always two sides story to oh yeah. There's always two sides to a story. Your side, my side, and the truth. Or three sides to
I
a
love
story.
it.
Something like that.
I love
Anyways.
that. I love that.
Yeah.
Gil, you mentioned a couple times about your creative process, and I've seen your creative process. It's amazing. One thing that people might not be aware of that is that they need to do some heavy lifting. They need to do some real deep thinking about their business, and it's amazing to see the transformation when you work with them. These aha moments come up, right? Can
Yeah.
you kind of tell me just a little brief, like how does your creative process work and
Yeah.
what's your goal with it?
Well, the advantage that I have over, say, designers or sort of agencies is that, I'm an entrepreneur and I've had a bunch of my own businesses. And so when I look at a brand, I don't just think about the aesthetics or the sort of or just the narrative. I think about the customer experience. I think all those things that we just talked about. Like, what are you as a business owner going to need to create in order to support this brand, in order to support the story, and in order to create this amazing experience for your people? And so that when you ask those questions, when you ask like, why are you doing this? Why are you even becoming, a business owner? What is your true motivation? Why are you not opting for a job? Why do you love what you do? Um, you know, what is it that you want to help customers with? What are your customers' holes, right? Because most entrepreneurs, again, they come in with that like, well, I do this and this and this, and you go, but why? Why do you do that? Why do you love it? What's so important about it, and why is it so important for your customers to actually get the service? And when you start asking those questions, all of these sort of the entrepreneur's personality comes out, and usually we tap into like why an entrepreneur actually wants to do this business and why it's important for them, and we get into all kinds of stories of the past and things that inspired them to start the business. Like we worked with a doctor, one of your clients, who had
Mm-hmm.
a history in her past who had a history in her past of having a family doctor who inspired her to become a doctor. And she was actually named after this family doctor. She got her name from the doctor. And so this story was really important. So we wove that story into the message. Like she remembered that doctor like made house calls and was so warm and personable. And so we talked about her business as if it it's like a warm hug, right? Like we wanted her business
Mm.
to feel like a warm hug. And that created what the business became. It created the feel of the business. And so now we have this kind of metaphor that comes from a truth that she had in her childhood, and we're building this business around that. And you can imagine if you walked into a doctor's office or worked with a doctor and it felt like a warm hug, you know what that might feel like. You know that you're being cared about, you know that you're being listened to, you know that you're walking away with the best possible treatment. So if you can create a brand around that and
I
actually execute
immediately
it,
went to
you win.
I
Yeah.
immediately went to visually thinking of the doctor in the Virgin Islands that I used to go to every
Yeah.
few months. So again, connection, right? You're
Yep.
creating a connection with the imagery, and then we transferred into her website like a warm hug. So
Mm-hmm.
it made it easier for our designers and developers to translate that into the aesthetic.
Yeah.
Um, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, I don't like the word tagline because it just seems like an afterthought. But I always ask clients, what makes you all that and a bag of fries, right? Like what is it?
Mm-hmm.
And they all say, oh, well, I've got good customer service. I'm like, yeah, you and 5 million other people, right? So is it story? Is there anything else that helps people get to that 3 second, like, because again, we have 3 seconds to capture people's attention online. So you need something that's short and pithy that identifies who you help immediately. And that's a lot of work. I mean, you think it might be easy, but for small businesses, it's not.
Well, first of all, that's why you hire me, because I've been doing it for a long time
Yeah,
and that's my
exactly.
job. And you're not going to become an expert at it. Though I work with businesses that are really good at it. You don't
Mm-hmm.
need just one tagline. First of all you
That's good
need
to
from,
know.
yeah, all you need from your tagline is that somebody wants to read the next line. That's all. It doesn't need to represent. I think people think that the tagline needs to represent their entire business. It's not true. All that tagline needs to do is get you down to the next line and the next line and the next line. Each line needs to get you closer and closer to all the information that you need. And if you can, you know, you don't need, like they say, 3 seconds, but you can't learn about a business in 3 seconds. You can get an impression. That's where the brand
Mm.
comes in. That's where the design, that's where the fonts, that's the first sort of entry, right? So you have very nice typography and very nice colors that are appropriate for your business and maybe unique or create some sort of feeling. That's the first thing people get, right? They look and they're like, ooh, this looks pleasant. This looks nice colors. Let me read the tagline. Then they read the tagline and it's something, maybe it doesn't even say anything about the business, but it's, like if I said, I don't think this is the tagline we use, but uh, a warm, a visit to us feels like a warm embrace. That's it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Something like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Suddenly
Stops people in their tracks.
you're like, oh, this is what could possibly feel. How could a doctor's office, a doctor's visit feel like a warm embrace? Then you read the next line and you hear, this is what we do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you've got me because I'm interested. You've said something that I've never heard before. You've created a metaphor or a vision in my mind, and now I'm ready to move forward. So it's not about capturing the entire business, but it's just about leading people down those messaging steps.
And I love that you mentioned that you need more than one tagline because think about it, it's almost like writing that email hook, that title
Yeah.
for your email to get people to open it. It's
Yeah.
it's getting people's attention, and of course that is what we're all trying to get. This has been amazing. Obviously, I'm going to need to have you come back and talk further because branding changes and everything. But what is the state of play today in your industry? What are you seeing that either is working really well or that people may not have considered that is coming down the line that you're seeing? Because I mean, there's big changes with digital, people working. There's 30% more people online than there was 2 years ago. What makes branding more important today than ever?
Well, like always, and this has kind of been around for the last 10 years, but it's only amplified now more and more, and that's authenticity. And I know that's a buzzword that's been thrown around, but being authentic, there's an ATV behind me, and I don't know if you can hear it, but it's really loud. Um, Everybody here in Costa Rica, where I am, like drives around ATVs, so it's like the roar of ATVs are constant. Um, uh, Authenticity is still king. But the thing about authenticity and the reason it's so difficult is people are not trained to be authentic. They're trained to put on a face. They're trained to speak like they're supposed to. So actually becoming an authentic brand takes an entrepreneur to be authentic themselves. And so I think today more than ever, the entrepreneur needs to do a lot of work on themselves. They need to do personal development. They need to really learn about themselves. The more they're connected to who they truly are, I think the better chance they have to make an impact in the world. So it's almost not a branding thing. It's almost like a personal thing. Like as a human
Mm.
being, be better, learn to be more honest with yourself, do the work that it takes to cut through your conditioning and really go deep, do a deep dive in yourself. And once you do, you're in a much better place to build something memorable and something that people really connect with.
That's a tall order, especially when everyone is looking at social media, right? And as a small business owner myself, I'm just like, comparing myself with others and all that stuff, right? And it kind of hijacks my authenticity. So I think for creative purposes, going to Costa Rica for a month would help, or just getting away from your company to do that kind of personal development is works for me.
Entrepreneurship is not an easy task. It tests and challenges you in a lot of different ways. And I think the more, there's a reason why entrepreneurs um, lean into self-development. It's because it's necessary, right? Like
Mm,
imposter syndrome, when you're trying to get a business off the ground that has never existed before, and suddenly you have to sell people an idea that maybe they've never heard, or a service they've never experienced. That takes something. It takes a sort of willpower, and that tests you, right? Because you're always told from most people, like some people grow up with entrepreneur parents, but most people grow up with parents that worked a job, or parents that, have taught them to play it safe and get a certain kind of degree. And today those things don't apply anymore. So,
mm.
everybody who's going into entrepreneurship needs to really work on themselves and like get their inner fortitude ready and get their skills up and really master their craft. It's not just going to happen.
But the beautiful thing about that is once they start doing that, all these stories start to develop, right? They come up, they bubble up. So I always recommend my fellow entrepreneurs to write that shit down, write those stories down, because you can use that in growing your business.
Yeah.
So time's up, but thank you, Gil. This has been amazing. Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and SuperBrand?
Thanks, Pia. Always a pleasure talking to you. SuperBrand.la. www.superbrand.la is where to find me. I have an Instagram account, supposedly. I don't really look at it anymore, but it's there. It's doing something. I have a LinkedIn. I don't even go on that. It's doing something. I'm kind of doing things differently. I focus on my craft, and now we have a little team that kind of takes care of that social media stuff that I don't really have time to engage with, but it's all there. It's all
Yep.
happening.
Yep.
And you can
Great.
always reach me
Well,
at
thanks
Gil.
again, Gil.
Yeah, you can always reach me at Gil@superbrand.la.
Great. We'll have that in the show notes too. Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thanks, Pia. We'll talk soon.